Nowa Huta is the easternmost district of Kraków, Poland. With more than 200,000 inhabitants, it is one of the most populous areas of the city. Neighboring districts until 1990 considered expansions of the original Nowa Huta township, and linked by the same tramway system, include Wzgórza Mistrzejowice, Bieńczyce, and Wzgórza Krzesławickie. They are now separate districts of Kraków. History. The historic area of present-day Nowa Huta is one of the few places in Poland settled continuously since the Neolithic age. Archaeological research has discovered a big Celtic settlement and Poland's oldest Slavic settlements there. In the 8th century, a mound was erected nearby by the Vistulans. According to legend, the Wanda Mound is a tomb of Wanda, daughter of Krakus, a mythical founder of Kraków. In the 13th century a Cistercian monastery in the village of the Mogila was built. In the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century, during the partitions of Poland and up to the First World War, the outskirts of Nowa Huta constituted a border between territories controlled by the Austrian and Russian empires. One can find historic Austro-Hungarian forts there, as one of Europe's oldest permanent airfields. Following the Vistula-Oder offensive in 1945, the communist authorities had encountered substantial resistance to their new regime from middle-class Krakowians. A referendum held by the authorities was soundly defeated by the people of Kraków, a major cause of embarrassment for the government. To correct the class imbalance, the authorities commenced building a satellite industrial town to attract people from lower socio-economic backgrounds to the region, such as peasants and the working class. Nowa Huta was started in 1949 as a separate town near Kraków on terrain taken by the communist government from former villages of Mogila, Krzesławickie and Czyżyny. It was planned as a huge center of heavy industry. The town was to become an ideal town for the communist propaganda and populated mostly by industrial workers. In 1951 it was joined with Kraków as its new district and in the following year tramway communication was started. On July 22, 1954, the Vladimir Lenin Steelworks was opened and in less than 20 years the factory became the biggest steel mill in Poland. In the 1960s the city grew rapidly. The monumental architecture of the central square was surrounded by huge blocks of flats. In the 1970s the steel production reached 7 million tons annually. At the same time the biggest tobacco factory in Poland was opened there and a huge cement factory. The reasons for building such an industrial town near Kraków were mostly ideological because coal had to be transported from Silesia and iron ore from the Soviet Union. While the products were shipped to other parts of Poland due to local demand for steel being relatively small. Such disadvantages became visible in the 1980s, when the economic crisis halted the city's growth. Nevertheless, the primacy of political reasons for choosing this location is not obvious. Kraków was a center of learning, with established schools of engineering and scientific research departments, providing the necessary expertise along with qualified staff. The presence of good rail links for bringing raw materials and the proximity of the river to supply water also played a role. The site was elevated enough to avoid flooding, and the historic villages raised, were relatively small. All above factors quickly made the investment pay off. One type of building lacking from the original urban design of Nowa Huta township was a Roman Catholic church. The public campaign to construct it lasted several years. As early as 1960, inhabitants of Nowa Huta began applying for permit to build a church. In that year, violent street fights with riot police erupted over a wooden cross, erected without a permit. The locals were supported by Bishop Karol Wojtyła, the future Pope John Paul II, who started holding outdoor Christmas Eve midnight masses in 1959, regardless of weather, and replaced the cross every time it was removed. In 1967, permits to build the desired church were granted and eventually a church called the Lord's Ark was built. The complex was consecrated by Wojtyła in 1977. Wojtyła himself, after being elected pope in 1978, wanted to visit Nowa Huta during his first papal pilgrimage in 1979, but was not permitted to do so. In the 1980s, Nowa Huta became a place of many demonstrations and violent street protests of the Solidarity movement, fought by the police. At that time, almost 29,000 of the 38,000 workers of the then Lenin Steelworks belonged to the Solidarity trade union. Architecture before 1956 . The doctrine of socialist realism in Poland, as in other countries of the People's Republics, was enforced from 1949 to 1956. It involved all domains of art, but its most spectacular achievements were made in the field of architecture. The main lines of this new trend were very precisely indicated in a 1949 resolution of the National Council of Party Architects. Architecture was an extremely important weapon to the creators of a new social order. It was intended to help to form a socialist theme, the ideas sparking citizens' consciousness and outlook on life. During this great work, a crucial role fell to the architect, who wasn't perceived as merely an engineer creating streets and edifices, but an engineer of the human soul. The general outlook of a building was more valued than its simple aesthetics. It needed to express social ideas, to arouse a feeling of persistence and power. Since the style of the Renaissance was generally regarded as the most revered in Old Polish architecture, it was to become also Poland's socialist national format. However, in the course of incorporating the principles of socialist realism, there were quite a few deviations introduced. One of these was to more closely reflect Soviet architecture, which resulted in the majority of works blending into one another. And finally, the general acceptance of the classicist form. From 1953, critical opinions were increasingly frequently heard, and the doctrine was finally given up in 1956. Currently, the Surrealist city centre is considered a monument of architecture. After 1956 . Following the political liberalization of the Polish October in 1956, it became possible to introduce modernist style in architecture. Polish architects were allowed to visit Stockholm to learn about the newest solutions in urban design. As a result, the so-called Swedish apartment block was developed according to Le Corbusier guidelines. Among other buildings from that era, the SHWIATOWID cinema is worth noting. In the 1980s, the first postmodernist buildings were built. In the 1970s and 1980s, most blocks of flats were built using Plattenbau. Nowa Huta's Central Avenue of Roses featured a country-wide known statue of Vladimir Lenin unveiled on April 28, 1973. The bronze monument was pulled down in 1989 by the city, as a result of numerous protest actions by local citizens. Several thousand onlookers came to watch the dismantling. Also, sacral architecture should be noted, especially Arka Pana Church, which was built to resemble Noah's Ark. It was designed by the architects Wojciech Pietrczyk and Jan Grabacki, with the design being influenced by Le Corbusier's Notre Dame du Haut in Ronchamp. Nowa Huta today . Since the fall of communism, the city that was once a showpiece for Stalinism now boasts many tributes to ardent anti-communists. Streets formerly named after Lenin and the Cuban Revolution have been renamed to honor Pope John Paul II and the Polish World War II hero Władysław Anders. Other streets were renamed after Edward Ried's Shmigay and Ignacy Mrawicki, politicians of the pre-war Sonation regime. In 2004, Plac Centralny, Nowa Huta's central square, which once was home to a giant statue of Lenin, on display at the High Chaparral Museum in Hillerstorp, Sweden, was renamed Ronald Reagan Central Square in honor of the former U.S. president. However, this decision led to many objections, and the traditional name is still widely used. Cultural significance: Nowa Huta is the location of an award-winning film by Andrzej Wajda called The Man of Marble, based on a true story of the rise and fall of a Stakhanowite bricklayer who helped build a new model socialist city in the course of Stalinism in Poland. Man of Marble, made in the mid-1970s, presaged the Solidarity labor union movement in Gdańsk that was ultimately responsible for overthrowing communism, as the film that starts in Nowa Huta ends in Gdańsk. When the district was built in the 1950s, Songs promoted by propaganda in the People's Republic of Poland included the widely popular hit single O Noć to Husi Piosenka, still remembered today especially by many Poles of the older generation. Nowa Huta has figured prominently in Polish literature since its very beginning. The earliest works focused on ideological progress and on the conflict between the bourgeois city and its new communist district of Nowa Huta. Among writers were Marian Brandes and Tadeusz Konecki. A hefty supply of short poems included Jalu Kurek Z Nowa Huta Poczta Cube WKA was named after him for that, and future Nobel laureate Wisława Szymborska. Although Nowa Huta disappeared from literary narratives after the period of socialist realism, it returned during the 1980s when it became the hotbed of struggle against communism and later, during the 1990s, when it became a symbol of the new post-communist reality stemming from both its socialist and anti-socialist past. Poland's first ever opera written in 1794 by Wojciech Boguszałowski, called The Presumed Miracle, or The Krakowians and the Highlanders, is set in the historic village of Mogiea where Nowa Huta was built. The two newest housing estates are named after the play, Osiedle Krakowiaka Cube W and Osiedle Gar Cube Drali. The opera by Boguszałowski was also the first theatre production played upon the opening the district's legendary Ludowy Theatre. Oedipus, a tragedy from Nowa Huta is a play based on ancient Greek myth about Oedipus, premiered in Angstrom or near Nowa Theatre under direction of Bartosz Zydarowski. Cultural venues Teat Ludowy, Nowa Huta's original theatre venue. Angstrom or near Nowa Theatre, Sphinx Arthouse Cinema, the Nowa Huta Cultural Centre, the Cyprian Norwood Cultural Centre. Landmarks: Wonder Mound, Cistercian Abbey in Mogiea, Jan Matejko Manor in Krzyżowice, Brands Manor Street Wenceslaus Church Street Bartholomew Church, Austro-Hungarian Forts, Batowice, Mistrzejowice, Dounia, Krzyżowice, Gra unregistered trademark Bar Cube W, Mogiea, Tadeusz Senzimia Steel Mill, Plaque Centralny, and Arlegia Rankin Cubed Angstrom 1/4 Architecture, Arkapana Church and Chapel of Conciliation in Bieżice, Polish Aviation Museum in Gzia 1/4 Ini, branch of the Historical Museum of Kraków Cube W, History of Nowa Huta. Industry: Tadeusz Senzimia Steel Mill owned by Mittel Steel Company, Kraków Cube W Power Station, Philip Morris Cigarettes Company. Commarch, an international software house, Interior PL, a company operating Poland's third biggest portal. Education: Faculty of Mechanical Engineering, Tadeusz Kościuszko University of Technology. Academy of Physical Education. Sport: Nowa Huta is home to several notable Kraków Cube W sports clubs. Rich in history, Hutnik Nowa Huta Football Club has a sizable support in the city, as does Kraków Cube W's only speedway club Honda Kraków Cube W. See also, Gajnoza Eurotygodnik Nauki, Kraków Cube W, History of Kraków Cube W, Eisenhower 1/4 Tenstadt, Magnitogorsk. Notes and references. Bibliography: Mariusz Czechowski, Cultural Landscapes of Post-Socialist Cities. Representation of Powers and Needs. Ashgate 2008. ISBN 978-0-7546-7022-3. Catherine Lebo, Uni-Finished Utopia. Nowa Huta, Stalinism and Polish Society 1949–1956. Cornell University Press 2013. ISBN 978-0-8014-5124-9, Stanisław Panek and Edmund Piasecki. Nowa Huta. Rakija 1971. K. Poziak, Reinventing a Model Socialist Steel Town in the Neoliberal Economy, The Case of Nowa Huta, Poland, City and Society, 1, pages 113–134. Katarzyna Zaszenta, Evolving Narratives in Post-War Polish Literature, The Case of Nowa Huta, Slavonic and East European Review, 85 2007, pages 658–683. ISSN 00376795, Katarzyna Zaszenta, Repositioning of Post-Socialist Narratives of Nowa Huta and Una Jva Roz, reviewed as a Permeltude Slaves, 86 2015, pages 141 to 156. ISSN 0080-2557. External links, Nowa Huta Tourist Route, from the city's official website, Nowa Huta, a Communist Paradise, English, Mindmapping Nowa Huta, Student Workshop, English, NH Reportage, Photos, Polish, Nowa Huta Internet Portal, Arkapana, Catholicism Comes to Nowa Huta, Polish, Nowa Huta Daily News, English, Poems by Emanuel Mifsud about Poland including 2 about Nowa Huta, Polish, Nowa Huta Photo Documentation, Satellite photo of Nowa Huta Center, Satellite photo of the steelworks, The Snapshots My Way,